Hi everybody, we know from my last video that protectionist policies are barriers to trade in order to protect domestic firms from foreign competition. But in this video, we want to target why. Why do domestic firms need protecting from foreign competition? What are the reasons for protectionism? We're going to go through some very common reasons, evaluating them as we go, but very powerfully, we're going to link these reasons to the tariff diagram that we also covered in my prior video. So really make sure that you've watched that prior video, you understand this diagram in high detail to help you get through this video. Let's dive in. Well, a very common reason for protectionism is the infant industry argument. Yes, using protectionist policies to allow small infant industries in a country to grow in size, to produce more output, to develop economies of scale, crucially, to then become more internationally competitive without that threat of global competition. And the idea is once these firms are competitive with more established industries overseas that already have large economies of scale, the protectionist measures can be taken away. This is a way to diversify an economy and to allow a wide range of industries to prosper in a country. And diagrammatically, we can see that a tariff, for example, that increases the price of imports or increases prices generally here can encourage more domestic output from Q1 to Q3. And there's your link to higher business growth, to greater economies of scale, which can then support the infant industry argument. But to evaluate this, the risk with using protectionism to try and improve competitiveness is that it can do the opposite. If firms are given something on a plate without really deserving it, it can promote complacency and inefficiency over time as costs elsewhere in the business increase. So maybe over time, businesses don't become more competitive, they become less competitive and less productive. This is a genuine concern. So for this argument really to hold, it's important that businesses are monitored when protectionism is enacted, and also that protectionism isn't endless, that there is an end date to it to make sure that we actually get the fruits of this reason. The other risk is that of retaliation. Yes, foreign countries not liking their exports being the target of protectionist policies to allow a rival country's infant industries to grow in size. No. So it's likely that foreign countries could retaliate and enact their own protectionist measures back on this country's exports. And the end result of that is infant industries won't be able to grow enough in size if they can't export that good to the rest of the world, limiting the benefit of this argument. Another reason for protectionism is to protect against dumping. Dumping is when a good is sold overseas at a price below cost of production, which could then destroy overseas industries. This is an illegal trade practice, but it still happens commonly around the world. So naturally, if a country feels like goods are being dumped in their country, they're going to want to stop that. And the way they can do that is through protectionism, like a tariff that increases the price of imports and hopefully takes away that dumping advantage. The problem with this reason, though, is that to do it properly, you need to prove that goods are being dumped in your country. You've got to collect evidence to prove it and then file a case through the World Trade Organization. They should adjudicate it and hopefully come on your side, in your favor, and then enact sanctions on the country that is dumping. But often countries bypass the World Trade Organization. It's hard to collect evidence, and often it takes the World Trade Organization a long time to come to an end conclusion. So by bypassing them, you're asking for, one, potential sanctions from the WTO if you're wrong and actually there isn't dumping that's been taking place, but also you're risking retaliation from countries that won't like the allegations of dumping. Another very common reason for protectionism is to protect against unemployment. We know that with free trade, industries without the comparative advantage simply will not be able to survive, they'll die away, and with that you'll see a rise in structural unemployment and all the problems that are created from that for the economy, but also for the individuals that will be unemployed. So to prevent that happening, protectionist policies like a tariff that encourage more domestic output, so here from Q1 to Q3, can not only save jobs, maybe even create jobs, as labour is a derived demand. That's a theory anyway. The problem with this argument is that if the industry is chronically uncompetitive and lacks a comparative advantage, protectionist measures might just be delaying the inevitable. Like eventually the industry is going to die away anyway. It's a natural process. So would it be better for the government instead to enact training programs, put into place training programs or relocation programs to allow workers to gain new skills and to move to jobs that are more safe in the economy instead? An interesting argument, not a good argument if there is dumping. If there is dumping, then no, don't let the industry die away. That's ridiculous. You've got to fight to make sure that it survives from that dumping practice. But no, under normal circumstances, without a comparative advantage, are we just delaying the inevitable with protectionist measures? But also the worry of retaliation. If foreign countries retaliate and impose their own harsher protectionist measures back, more jobs could be lost as a result of retaliation than saved from the initial protectionist measures. Protectionism can take the form of standards like health and safety standards, product safety standards, environmental standards, worker standards. So countries can enact these for the first time or raise standards as a protectionist measure. The point is to protect key stakeholders, right? Consumers, workers, the environment, society at large. But you can't just do this willy-nilly, otherwise it will just be another block to imports, another general form of protectionism. You need to prove through the World Trade Organization that the standard is necessary or that the raise in the standard is necessary. Without that, you can be sanctioned by the WTO or you can face heavy retaliation from your trading partners. Protectionist policies like tariffs, of course, raise government revenue. We know that as area H on our diagram. And this is a very useful source of revenue for developing countries because it's easy to collect and also can be in very high sum, useful to fund key development spending on education, on health, on infrastructure, welfare, etc. And for developed countries, the revenue can be very useful to further help domestic producers out, for example, by funding subsidies to them. But elasticity is crucial. So if demand and supply domestically are both price inelastic, it means imports are not going to be squeezed very much, which means more government revenue is going to be collected. But more elastic domestic supply and domestic demand will mean that imports come down a lot, and that restricts the amount of government revenue collected. And lastly, a very common reason for protectionism is to reduce a current account deficit. The argument is super simple. Impose a tariff, we see this squeeze of imports now to only Q3, Q4. And ceteris paribus, crucially, so assuming that export revenue stays the same, that's going to help reduce a trade deficit, reduce the current account deficit. Going further, maybe increase X minus M in the AD equation, boost AD and boost economic growth. Yeah, that's all theory. The easy evaluation to that is questioning that ceteris paribus assumption. There is no way your export revenue is going to stay the same because foreign countries will not accept this reason for protectionism. They will not accept the attack on their exports for another country to reduce their current account deficit. So retaliation is very likely, meaning for the initial country, their export revenue is likely to fall by more than their import expenditure falls by. So more likely, you're going to see a worsening of the trade deficit and a worsening of the current account deficit overall. You've also got elasticity, as already mentioned. Inelastic domestic supply, domestic demand means the import reduction won't be that big. But let's finish this video, guys, now by looking at more general evaluation points to protectionist policies. Well, very simply, we can worry about the market distortion from policies like tariffs and quotas that raise prices and reduce quantities. We see the higher price from PW to PW plus T, the lower consumer surplus of E, F, G, H and I, that's the overall consumer surplus loss, the deadweight loss of area I as we covered in my previous video, and also just the lower quantity from Q2 to Q4 is very clear on the diagram. And this is terrible news for consumers who struggle with affordability. Their living standards can reduce, their quality of life can reduce as they struggle to access these key imports now at higher prices. But also tariffs can be regressive. They take a greater proportion of the income from lower income households than they do from higher income households, widening inequality, which is an undesirable side effect. But also the lower quantity just restricts consumer choice. This also harms businesses, right? If tariffs are placed on the imports of raw materials, it can drive up cost of production for firms, which worst case can lead to business bankruptcy, or at least can reduce profit margins. The lower quantity can restrict access to key materials too, maybe impacting on the quality of the final goods sold. We've already mentioned this retaliation concern, but boy, the risk of retaliation is very, very high. It's unlikely that foreign countries are going to accept the initial reasons for protectionism. So the risk of retaliation is strong. Retaliation is likely to be harsher than the initial protectionist measures. The end result of that is we end up with a trade war between countries, tit for tat, back and forth protectionism, where all the other issues of protectionism listed here get worse, but also the initial reasons, as we've seen already, will tend not to hold. So that's a very strong evaluation point. The irony with point number 3, protectionism is supposed to help domestic firms, but could actually end up harming them. One way is if protectionism is imposed on the imports of raw materials that drive up cost of production for firms or restrict key access for firms, maybe driving them out of business as a result of that. But also, if these firms are randomly targeted through retaliatory protectionism, they're dragged into a trade war where their export revenue is hit very hard. It's another way they can be hurt significantly. So if that's the case, actually more harm could be done to domestic firms than actually benefit via protectionist policies. Great evaluation there. Could certain protectionist policies and the way they've been put in place be breaking WTO rules as we've considered? Could then countries be sanctioned as a result of that? Nice evaluation. We know the allocative inefficiency of policies like a tariff and also a quota. Area G on this diagram is the allocative inefficiency. That will take you back to comparative advantage distortion and then higher prices and lower quantities. The cost of certain protectionist policies like subsidies can be very high, can be a long-term drag on government finances with negative consequences over time. And we've already mentioned the importance of elasticity in determining whether current account deficits will come down and determining the level of government revenue collected. So there you have it, guys. Reasons for protectionism, yes, with evaluation, but also general great evaluation points of protectionism. It's a fascinating debate. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully you found it interesting. Can't wait to see you in the next one.